Welcome to episode 1 of the Everyday Christian Podcast. Today we're talking about mental health with our friend Dr. Robert Bakss. Well, here we are.
Here we are.
Episode 1.
Yep.
Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
I am ready. I have
Do you
my...
have your mug?
I told her, I said, I'll take any mug as long as it's not feminine.
It's not.
And this is what I got. So
M for
if you're
Matt.
listening to this, it is a maroon... What do you call this?
A mug?
No, it's like a goofy girl shape.
A girl shape?
Yeah.
How is that a girl
It's a
shape?
girl mug. And it's got an M on it, which I assume is for Matt.
I didn't know that girls had shapes.
No, the girl mug. Girls obviously have shapes.
Well, okay.
But that's a different podcast.
Really?
But this is what I would call a feminine mug.
Well, it works for me.
But it does have water in it because coffee is gross.
Coffee is not gross.
It's weird because it like
Coffee is a lifeline.
because of the way that it's curved. It like you go to drink out of it and
it holds your coffee in so nice.
no,
and
it
like
takes
a hug
longer
for
to
your
get to
coffee.
your mouth. If it was coffee, it would burn my mouth because I would be like waiting for it and then it would pour
Oh,
in.
you sip.
No, it's a weird mug.
It's wonderful.
Anyway,
Anyway,
it is episode
Moving
1
on.
of our brand new podcast called The Everyday Christian. We're super excited about this
yep.
because it's a podcast designed to be for the everyday Christian.
The Everyday Christian.
There are podcasts and there are blogs and YouTube channels and stuff that help pastors, and they're wonderful,
Yeah.
and pastors' wives, and we love those.
Yep, they're
and,
great.
And we gain value from them. But I work at a factory.
Mm-hmm.
In order to pay the bills while we're planting this church, I needed a job.
Yeah.
And so,
did.
so I went and got a job at a factory, and Christy is working as the chamber director in our community. So
Yep.
we are around wonderful people, and a lot of them who know the Lord and love the Lord.
Yep.
And we started thinking, where do they go? Where can they go for good content that isn't a 250-page book? Because let's face it, it's hard to find time to read a 250-page
Oh,
book.
yes.
Like even for
Yes.
us, even as content people, it's hard
Yeah.
to find time to read that much.
Yeah.
Sermons are good, but not necessarily the best way for everyone to learn. And so a sermon podcast wasn't necessarily what we were looking for. So we started something called the Everyday Christian Network.
Yeah.
And part of the Everyday Christian Network is this podcast. And it's designed to be beneficial to people that are just living their lives in a way that you can either watch it on YouTube when you've got some time,
Yeah.
or you can put it in your earbuds and listen while you exercise or in your car while you're driving.
Yeah. And, since we have a passion to help people, we thought starting with this particular topic was a great idea. And today's topic is mental health, primarily depression and anxiety.
Yeah, I think because so many people struggle with it
Yeah.
and battle it.
Yeah.
In fact, our guest is going to talk through some of those statistics. But it's also something, if I'm just being totally honest, it's something that I wanted to talk to him about because I don't think I'm good at dealing with this topic. I felt like it's a topic that if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm struggling with mental health issues, I wasn't sure that I knew how to help them. And it's thankfully starting to get a little bit more airtime. People are talking about it.
Well, because it's real.
Well, just in the last
It's so
year,
real.
I think there's at least 2 pastors that we've heard of that have taken their own lives.
Yeah.
It just got that difficult for them, and so many people that are struggling with it. So I'm excited that this conversation that you're going to hear is with Dr. Robert Bakss, who's a pastor in Australia. One of the reasons I think he's perfect for it is not just because he's an expert on it, but he lives it. Because years ago, and he's going to, I believe, share the story, if I remember correctly, years ago, his wife was diagnosed with bipolar. So it's something that's a part of his life today,
Right.
something that they go through on a regular basis, and
Right.
something he has to love her and help her through on a regular basis. And on top of that, because it's something that he's dealt with, he's a prolific writer, and he's written 2 books already. One is on the subject of bipolar, and the other one is on anxiety called When Panic Attacks. And we're going to link to those and tell you where you can get those here in a little bit. And I'm excited too. I don't even know if I told you this yet. In December, his goal is to have another book come out
Wow.
about depression.
That's great.
So
Yeah.
a subject that he's very in tune with.
That's great. So I know this was a conversation, Matt, that you were really looking forward to.
Yeah.
Can you tell us maybe some highlights that we should be listening for?
I think, first of all, I think a lot of Christians are confused about how to help somebody that's dealing with any form of mental illness. In fact, I think the term mental health and mental illness have been kind of taboo in our Christian cultures. We kind of look at them as purely spiritual things, because how do you, like, if somebody comes and says, I have a fever, we can measure that.
Right.
We can see that, and
Right.
we can give them Tylenol and help their fever go down. If somebody comes and says, I'm depressed, we tend to just think, I grew up thinking, you just need more of Jesus.
Right. You just love Jesus more and you'll be all right.
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 Like you obviously lack faith. And so
Right.
because you lack faith, you're struggling with this. And if you would increase your faith, then you'll be fine. He debunks some of that and helps explain why some of it isn't just a spiritual war, although that is certainly a part of it. In fact, that's the other kind of highlight that I would say, is that he does talk about the medical, the mental, and the spiritual aspect of this, and how all of that kind of works together.
Yeah.
So I think that was super helpful.
Great. Well, if you or someone you know is struggling with this topic, we really hope that this will be a help to you. And here is Matt's conversation with Dr. Robert Bakss on the topic of mental health.
So you have written a couple of different books about the issue of mental health,
Yes.
various different topics. I'll let you go into some of that. Tell me a little bit about what it is that you've written and where those kind of came from.
Okay. Well, Matt, what had happened? My wife and I were, we've been married 35 years, and we began our marriage just as the average couple traveling through life, serving the Lord. I was working in the legal world and ministering on the side, and then about 8 years into our marriage, something shifted, and we didn't know what it was. We'd had 3 little kids by this time, but there was a change in my wife, and some things had happened. And for us, we were confused about it, and she was going up and down in her emotions, and we weren't sure what it was. And we later found out that it was the unwelcomed visitor of bipolar disorder had entered into our home. And that changed our whole life and has done since that period of time. So the issue of mental health and mental illness has become very personal in our lives because it is our lived experience. And that's why we decided about 10 years ago, we need to start to speak on this and talk about it, because every time I'd ever mention it, it was always, the response was varied to the point of where people thought, aren't you embarrassed to talk about this?
Right.
Or is there a stigma attached to this? Or some would come up and whisper to me, oh, I've got this as well, or my brother has this, or my son. And we thought someone needs to speak out on it. So that became our goal, was to really break the silence and help remove some of the stigma when it comes to mental illness.
What was that like then, just for you? Obviously, you're in ministry, you have a heart to serve other people, but that's got to come as quite a blow to you and your wife both.
Oh, for sure. Look, early on, Matt, what had taken place when we discovered that this was happening, we were absolutely confused.
Yeah.
We had no idea what was going on. And then you had, all the backyard doctors all making their diagnosis as well.
Right.
Well-meaning, but had no idea.
Yeah.
And we struggled through a lot of that, to the point, there was a few times in early ministry I thought, I don't know if I can continue in ministry. This is just too difficult to sort of juggle the two. And then you stand up, and here's what happened with us. Sometimes you felt this pressure to almost cover the concept that someone in your family has a mental illness, because it was so stigmatized in Christianity.
Right.
That you felt like you needed to make God look good, or surely Christians can't be suffering with this sort of mental illness, otherwise there must be something lacking. How can I get up and offer hope to a person when there are struggles in our own family? And it became a real challenge until we understood really what this was, and made a big difference in our life.
Well, and that's I don't in any way want to sound at all insensitive. I just know for me growing up, when I heard mental illness, I'm not saying it was the culture, I'm not saying I was taught this, it just was in me. I would hear mental illness and I would think somebody that, they're just loony or whatever. It seemed so taboo
Oh, for
almost.
sure.
And
Absolutely.
even issues of depression and anxiety, I looked at as, oh, they just need more faith or they need more of
Hmm.
Jesus. And it's easy to have the answers when you know nothing about it. I
Yeah.
discovered.
I
So help.
always,
Go ahead.
I think there are times where whatever you don't understand, you often fear.
Yes.
And that is, there is ignorance, there is fear, there is misunderstanding, there are sometimes even prejudices that come up in certain topics. And with mental illness, I think it had a, in Christianity, this is one reason why we did speak out on it, because in Christianity, it's probably even worse
Yeah.
that there is this stigma that can be attached to it, and it is often demonized.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's just denied, as you mentioned. Maybe you just need to have more faith, and maybe we need to pray more. And we spoke about this in both our books, in specifically the book on bipolar, which is called Poles Apart. We speak on this whole idea of, does the Bible address mental illness, and is it demonic? Is it
Right.
natural mental illness? And certainly there are both issues discussed in the scriptures. So we bring that out and help people get an understanding, because once people can understand, it removes some of the fear and apprehension about these things.
So let's go there for a little bit. And obviously, we only have a certain amount of time. We can't discuss the
Hmm.
whole thing, and we'll tell people where they can get these books later. But can you briefly break some of that down for us? So the natural side, the demonic side. What is mental illness, and how should a Christian be viewing mental illness and someone they know, their family or friend?
Sure. Well, here is the basic scenario that we come up with. When you look at the scriptures, yes, there are times that we see in the Bible the demoniac who was definitely not in his right mind and was struggling with what we would probably call a mental illness. And I have no doubt there are still issues today where people struggle with demonic issues. But for a Christian, we understand once you're born again, you can't be possessed with a demon. You can't be
Right.
possessed with the devil. Sure, there can be oppression and different things affecting your thoughts, but generally what we've discovered is mental illness is a natural condition that can happen. We live in a sin cursed world, and
Sure.
there are often triggers for it. Let me give, for example, let me just take the depression side of things.
Mm-hmm.
There is depression that happens that's more than discouragement, because depression is something that happens over a prolonged period of time of sadness. I always connect it with the word hopelessness.
Yeah.
And there are two often sources, an outward source and an inward source. The outward source is generally something that has triggered it. Hence, it is called circumstantial depression. And it
Okay.
could be, it's generally based in a loss, usually a loss of a job, loss of a loved one, loss of a future, something that has brought about a loss.
Yeah.
And then it can trigger a sadness, a discouragement, and the cycle continues even into a depression, which we feel, as we've looked at this and worked through it with many people now, that those sort of depressions are really about cognitive processing. Yes, getting over the issue, working through the grief, working through the loss, but thinking through our thoughts. Sometimes medicinal help can help just to calm a person, to get them into a good cognitive state of mind. And then there is other types of depression, which is more inward. In other words, it's there is no triggers. There
Mm.
are no circumstances. It's what you may call clinical chemical depression, and that's very connected with people who have bipolar, like my wife.
Okay.
We say this because she may wake up in the morning and we don't know whether she's going to be Tigger or whether she's going to be Eeyore. Not sure whether she's going to
Yeah.
be high as a kite or whether she's going to be in a deep dark depression. She doesn't choose that.
And this is
It
something
just
that's still
happens.
continuing today for her. She
Oh,
still
it can, yeah, for
deals with
sure.
this.
Now, medication can help stabilize some things because there
Okay.
is chemical imbalances in people's minds.
Okay.
But at any time, once a person has any mental health issue, they cannot use it as an excuse for sin.
Mm.
Now, I know from a legal world, yes, there is diminished responsibility in issues of crime. I get all that. But in the general run of life, you can't say, well, thou shalt not steal unless you've got bipolar.
Right.
It doesn't say that. So you need additional grace. You need help to work through different matters. Oh, thou shalt not lie. I accept you have depression. That's not.
Yeah.
There's no exemption. What it does mean is that you need to help your thought processes and work through it. So we do a lot with that in our books and talk about how to deal with those aspects of Christian living when you're
Yeah.
struggling with mental illnesses, and that's what we sort of talk about.
I know that I've been a part of some church cultures where when somebody's dealing with depression, the kind of the natural response is, quote more scripture,
Hmm.
um, read your Bible more, and just kind of this sounds crude, but kind of just suck it up. You're
Sure.
gonna be okay. Get through.
Yeah.
When
I,
someone's going, no, please go ahead.
what we found with that is, if a person's, here's what I tell people: if your body isn't producing insulin and is not, producing it in your system, where very much you could end up in a diabetic state or some sugar issues, we think nothing of supplying chemically to our body that which our body isn't supplying.
Yeah,
Or if your body is, your heart is under a lot of hypertension, again, we think nothing of supplying a chemical to our body to help our body work through those issues so we don't have a heart attack or heart disease. And yet, when somebody's brain, different than their mind, because the brain is the physical organ, is not secreting the right amount of serotonin or dopamine or whatever it may be, and there is some sort of blockage, which PET scans have shown, as you scan a depressed brain and a non-depressed brain, there is some blood flow problems and issues happening there. They don't know exactly what, but they do know that.
sure.
Well, here is what people will say: when you're struggling with that, just pray about it.
Yeah,
Well, hang on, we don't pray about heart disease or diabetes or cancer. We do something. And so
yeah,
similarly, there is the issue of the brain as an organ as opposed to just the mind. The mind is that part of your soul, we understand, which does need to be worked through, because your mind can get wrong thoughts that need to be addressed. But sometimes it's the brain that's affecting the mind.
yeah. So oftentimes I think with depression, anxiety, some of these things comes guilt, which just adds to that. So
Hmm.
if I'm someone who's struggling with depression, I don't want it to turn to guilt. I don't want it to turn into an excuse. Like you said, it's not a license to sin. So step one, if I'm dealing with depression, how do I need to view that first as the person dealing with it?
Okay, well, firstly, what you need to understand, this is not a new problem, it is an old problem. It is an ordinary problem. There are people through all generations, all races, status, every ages that have gone through moments of depression. And this is what's very, very helpful, because it actually comforts people that you're not alone in this.
Yeah,
That this is a problem that has been addressed by people over the centuries and will continue to be addressed. And the point with any aspect of depression or anxiety is always to remember, as I mentioned earlier, depression is often based in a loss, but anxiety is often based in a fear. And that's the root issues of both of those. And the answer for both of them is hope. That
yeah,
when a person loses hope, it's very difficult to pull themselves out of depressive states or anxious moments, because they lose hope. And when you tell a Christian or tell a person you just need to have more faith, well, here's what the Bible teaches: that faith is the substance of things hoped for.
mm,
And so it's very hard to hope for something and have faith if you don't have any hope. So you want to help keep putting hope back into a person. There is help, there is solutions. And when it comes to solutions, we always talk about physical treatment, mental treatment, and spiritual treatment. It's not
okay,
one or the other, it's a holistic approach. And
sure.
that's what helps, that's what gives a person hope.
So if I'm struggling with depression, I need to have
Mhm.
hope. What are some things, what are some resources, or who should I be talking to? What kind of things do I need to be looking for if I'm part of a church or something? What do I do now?
Okay. The very first thing you want to do is do not isolate yourself. Many times when a person goes into a mental health issue, and again, they feel stigmatized or they feel afraid, they feel confused, they withdraw.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing to do. What you want to do, and I always say the first stage of healing is revealing. And the
Mm,
idea of finding a person whom you can trust, whether it is a trusted friend, whether it is a godly person in that church or that environment that you know, the pastor or one of the church leaders, that you can at least address the issue with and say, I would really ask you to pray with me on some things, or can I talk to you about some issues happening in my life? Then from there, there may be necessary to to seek some professional help, whether it be through searching out an appropriate therapist, a psychotherapist, whether it be a psychologist. Psychiatry generally deals with medication issues.
Okay.
Psychology deals with thought processes.
Okay.
And I would always counsel a person, look, make sure you go and see your general practitioner, your local doctor, and let them know, because sometimes any mental illness you have, it can create physical problems.
Okay.
Not always, but it can create nausea, headaches, different issues that are taking place. And people end up thinking that's the problem,
Right.
when they're simply just symptoms of what's taking place because of thought processes and anxiety or panic attacks or whatever may be happening in a person's life. So the first step for me is seek somebody to speak to. Absolutely find somebody.
Yeah.
Do not be afraid to do that, and reach out to a person. First step you need to do is reach out.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that, if I'm the
Hmm.
one and if as the pastor of my church, how can
Hmm.
I create a culture at our church so that there is a sense of, if you're struggling with anxiety, depression, and mental illness, what can we as a body of Christ do to make people feel welcomed and loved and cared for and helped?
Hmm. Sure. I think there are so many things churches can do in this, and one thing is to uh, show some care and compassion for people. Another thing is to speak about this from the pulpit as a pastor
Hmm.
and let people know that this is okay. There is not a problem with a person who goes through moments of depression or anxiety. It's something that happens in society. In fact, when we look at society in your country alone, and in my country, we're very similar. You'll find 1 in 5 people, so 20% of people, will suffer a mental illness or a mental disorder somewhere in a year. It
Mm.
could be minor to severe. Then what you will also find is 1 in 2 people will suffer some type of mental illness condition in their lifetime. So we're talking
Wow.
50% of a population will suffer some form of mental issue. And it may be minor, it may be severe.
Sure.
What's more troubling is there are people who don't reach out for help. So I think a culture needs to be fostered in the church that this is okay to talk about it.
Right.
Preach on these topics, speak on the aspect of people who've worked through this, and speak on depression, speak on anxiety. I go around churches and give seminars on these things simply because it's something that needs to be spoken about, and give opportunity to give solutions and hope as you work through it. The other thing to do is this. I think it's good to create, whether it is possible, even some small groups and support groups that talk about the topic,
Yeah.
give some opportunity for people to speak. The third thing is offer help to people, practical help. For example, if someone is sick at home with they broke a leg or done something and they're just not well, many churches will often, maybe get some people to make a meal for that person, or,
Yeah.
can I come and mow your lawn, or can I do the washing? Can I help the kids get to school, or whatever it may be? And we do that for a person who has a physical illness. We ought to also do that for a person who has a mental illness, and recognize, it doesn't cost anything. I can turn up to your house and just pick your kids up and take them to school for you because you can't get out of bed today. It's okay. We're,
Yeah.
we're here to support you. And those things mean a huge amount to a person struggling with mental illness.
So when someone's going through mental illness, I've almost been of the impression that you need to encourage them to, get up, get going, do something.
Hmm.
But you're kind of saying, to a degree at least, to kind of do the opposite. Let them know it's okay. Get the
Hmm.
help you need. If you're in bed today, that's okay. Is
Hmm.
that Am I hearing that correctly?
You are, because there are times in a person when a person's struggling with mental illness, it's very difficult for them when people have a tendency to simply go, look, just snap out of it. What's wrong with you? Get up, get
Yeah.
going. And it can be more damaging.
Like it's a
In fact, with my
choice.
wife, oh, for sure. Look,
Yeah.
with my wife, one of the worst questions she despises, I suppose, at times is this: how are you feeling today?
Mm.
Now, for me, it was a natural question because you're wondering, is she getting better? Is what's happening?
Right.
The very fact that you ask the question can place more stress on a person. It's about saying, I'm just there for you no matter how you're feeling.
Sure.
Whether you're feeling good, you're feeling bad, I'm there for you. we're in this together. We're in the journey, and let's continue to do what we can. And if today's a good day, it's great. If it's a bad day, it's okay. And I think one of the dangerous parts is you don't want a person to, in a sense, institutionalize themselves either.
Right.
You don't want them to sort of say, well, this is why I'll always be. No,
Yeah.
that's where cognitive processing needs to come in. That's where hopeful thoughts, hopeful statements. There is a
So
passage
yeah,
in the
talk to me
Bible.
about that, because I feel like if my spouse is going through that, on the one hand, I'm hearing you, let her uh let her stay in bed, let her, but at the same time, you want to help them get better, right? Just
Hmm.
like if you, almost like a physical therapy for somebody that has a physical issue or
Yes.
something. So take me down that path a little bit of
Okay.
how to
Uh,
help them.
and I can only speak a lot from our lived experience and for
No,
those
that's
in whom
great.
we've helped. What we've always tried to do is there is always going to be a period of time that is a grieving process, if we want to call it that.
Okay.
It's the non-functional period of time where it's just very severe. And sometimes the most spiritual thing a person can do is rest.
Mm,
There was a time in Elijah's life. He was an old prophet of God, and he got depressed, to suicidal thoughts. The very thing that the messenger that God sent to him was, you need some physical treatment, you need some food, and you need some rest.
yeah.
But it wasn't to stay that way. That was for a period of time. Then, when that physical state has been clearly, okay, I've got enough rest, we can sort of work through this, and it's just discernment, working through that. You want to continue to start to feed positive thoughts through. Here is what I mean by that. There is a passage in the Bible, and it's the book of Proverbs, that talks about heaviness, like a heaviness in the heart of a person. It just causes their heart to stoop. You can sense this word description of a person bowed over and just struggling with a weight. And then it says this, but a good word maketh it glad. So the solution is always trying to find that good word
Yeah.
and to work out what is it that needs to be challenged, what is it needs to be inspired, what is it needs to be encouraged, and find those things to try to give a person hope that, we can do this again. This is happening. Whether you have children, whether you have different pursuits in life, and you can point people to those things that give them hope
Yeah.
and sort of encourage them along the way, because you don't want a person just to stay you know, in a depressed stupor without any measure of, get out of bed, try to work things through, because physical exercise is going to help a person.
Okay.
So what we've tried to do is we've set up a plan before the event. We've looked at some strategies that we know this is what, if Jen goes down into a depressed state, she already knows, she's worked through these strategies beforehand,
Okay.
because it's very cyclic in a person's life. And the first time can be troubling because you're not sure what's going on, but
Sure.
you'll come through it. And then when you come through it, you say, okay, now let's work through some strategies. So next time, what should we do? Okay, let's get sufficient rest. Let's make sure our diet is okay. Let's look at some exercise that we can work on. Let's look at the medicine we need to check on. Let's look at the thought processes. What scriptures can we call upon? What music can we put into our life? Who can we be around? What events do we want to pull back from? What events do we want to get involved with?
Yeah.
And there are various things, and you start to set up strategies, and we talk about them in all our books.
So are those strategies available in your books?
Yes, they are. Yeah, we
Super.
talk about all those in the Poles Apart book, especially, and in the one on what to do in panic attacks, and the one that I'm writing right now on battling and beating depression. Each of them have sections on practical solutions. And one thing I love to tell people is this: there are 25 practical solutions to deal with mental illness and things coming up in mental illness. And with that, what I tell people is 16 of them are available to anybody. They're
Okay.
available to any person, but there is 9 that are exclusive to the Christian.
Mm.
And that's why Christianity is so great,
Yeah.
because there is so much more that a Christian can gain, because there is that spiritual help that just, you're not just dealing with the physical and the mental, but you have that spiritual aspect that just really just pulls you over the line, and it just helps people so much. So we talk about very practical things in our book, give strategies to work through it. In the book on anxiety, we deal a lot with thought replacement and the techniques to use, because that's a huge issue.
Sure.
95% of treatment of anxiety issues and panic attacks is what they call CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. In other words, 95% of it deals with your thinking,
Hmm.
working through your thoughts.
Yeah.
The very minimal aspect of anxiety issues is other treatments. And if there is medicinal issues in anxiety, it's more to whether it's a diazepam, Valium type of thing, whether that's used simply to calm a person down because the physical effects have happened. There's hyperventilation. There's all these issues that are happening and heart palpitations to calm a person down so you can start to work with the thought processes.
Sure.
And that's how it's sort of dealt with.
Well, it's nice that you're kind of bringing those two together. I think far too long the church has kind of alienated, like psychology was a
Mm-hmm.
bad thing. Psychiatry
Yes.
was even worse because now they're just drugging them,
Mm.
and I'm sure there are, and I'm sure you
Oh, it can be
could share
abuses on
stories.
all
It could
those
be
things.
abused. Yeah. But so you're saying as believers, we want to bring all of that together, physical, mental, and spiritual, and
Correct.
that's where that solution is going to come in.
Correct.
So back me up a little bit then to you said something earlier about anxiety is dealing with fears.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when I begin to because I think some people are going to deal with suicidal thoughts. That's kind of the
Correct.
extreme end of it. Then back that gets backed up to there'll be people that deal with depression, but I think a lot of people, the majority of people are going to deal with some form of anxiety. So
Mm-hmm.
if we were going to kind of help the largest group of people possible right now, I think it would be the issue of anxiety. So
Oh, yes.
where
In
do I
fact,
go
it's
with
two
that?
to one. Generally,
Is it
it's
really?
yeah. For Australia, it's a much smaller population, but you can take the same proportions across America.
Yeah.
In Australia, we have 25 million people living in Australia, so
Okay.
it's not a huge population.
Yeah.
2 million people live with anxiety daily. 1 million people live with anxiety daily. Oh, sorry, live with depression daily. So you have 2 million with anxiety, 1 million
Okay.
with depression. So it's sort of like a 50% increase in the issues of anxiety. And anxiety is very much, as I said, based in fear.
Yeah.
And I think this is the cycle because and anxiety is always about a future fear. It's something that it's an anticipation of something that may happen that I may not have
Right.
control over.
So how do
It's
I
those
deal with that
threat.
as a believer?
Oh, look, people do it all the time.
Yeah.
It's that threat that may be in your mind
Yep.
that consumes your thinking.
I've been there. I mean, I've dealt with that.
Oh, look, and here's what happens, Matt. This is the steps. Fears are in society.
Yeah.
Hence, that's why in the scriptures, I think there's 366 fear nots in the Bible, one for every day of the year plus one for the leap year,
Yeah.
because God recognizes this is an issue that people deal with. And fear can grip a person, paralyze a person. And
Yeah.
what fear does, fear uncontrolled thought life and unchecked thought life can move to anxiety. So carefulness or anxiousness.
Yep.
Anxiousness and anxiety uncontrolled and undealt with will then move to panic attacks. And you think, where did this come from? And it's
Yeah.
rooted in fear. And so many times when you talk with people with anxiety, you've got to dig a little bit deeper at times and say, what's coming up in your life? What's taking place in your life? And you have to dispel the fear, answer the fear, help remove the fear. Now, for the Christian, the antidote is faith, because there
Sure.
are some things that will definitely be difficult to process. And this is coming up. How do I deal with this, or what's going to happen in the future? And it's the thought of where will this end? What will the consequences be? And those are the areas that start to consume a person. Then, when you look at anxiety, there's a range of disorders that come from that. PTSD, for example, is a is an order. I was dealing with a returned soldier from Afghanistan and Iraq area from in
Mhm.
Australia, and he he suffered with PTSD. He read my book on what to do in panic attacks, greatly helped him. And he said this is what his issue was. He got to the point where he couldn't even go through a drive-through at McDonald's
Wow.
because he didn't want to get a car behind him or a car in front of him. He felt trapped
Trapped.
because his mind would go back to his war zone moments.
Yeah.
And so he had to work through. He realized that these are fears. Now, where it becomes anxious moments is where it turns into an irrational fear, because we will have fears. I mean,
Right.
some fear is good. There is healthy fear, but there is hurtful and harmful fear, and they're the ones we must address.
So how do I know that it's irrational? Because when I'm the one fearing it, it
Mhm.
seems perfectly rational to me.
Oh, for sure, absolutely, because we deceive ourselves.
Right.
That's where the moment I the moment I know it's becoming irrational is where I'm suffering anxiety, where
Okay.
it's starting to affect me, and at that moment, again, I always tell people, you know, to be forewarned is forearmed. And so if I already know about these things, that irrational fears can create uh, different scenarios in my mind that if I run them through, they're not great endings in the scenario in my mind.
Yeah.
They're the things that I say, okay, hang on, where am I right now? I need to check my thoughts because I'm starting to hyperventilate. I'm starting to get anxious.
Yeah.
I'm having night sweats. I'm waking up all through the night. I'm not having, and they ought to be those symptoms ought to be the trigger to say there's something happening in my life. Get some help, get some treatment. See, one thing that people fail to remember is anxiety, depression, PTSD, borderline personality disorder, bulimia, anorexia. All of these are, they're all various issues of anxiety,
Right.
or whether it goes into depression issues. There is no scientific test to prove that you have it. You
Yeah.
can't go get a blood test. You can't
Right.
just go, get to the doctor and say, put me on an X-ray machine, give me a test, do whatever it is. Tell me if I have anxiety day. Nobody has that.
Sure.
Every one of these issues are symptomatic diagnoses.
Yep.
And so generally people start to recognize, and it'll either be their spouse sometimes who says you need some help
Hmm.
because you're driving them literally crazy. You're driving them, you're making them afraid.
Yeah.
Uh, or a person who has any general self-preservation is going to say there's something not right. I need some help.
Sure.
I'm not sleeping. Then it's affecting my work and etc. So that's you often seek help yourself, but it's others who are pushing you to get some help.
Hey, we're going to get right back to that conversation here in a second, but I wanted to tell you about a company called 1230 Media. 1230 Media is the company that we used for our motion graphics for this podcast, and they've helped us a ton with just getting ready for this with the logo design and the color schemes and those types of things. They're a company that helps churches primarily with transforming their worship experience. If you can't afford a full-time staff person but would love to have sermon bumper videos or motion graphics or slides that really look sharp and professional, these guys can get it done for a fraction of the cost. Be sure to check them out, 1230.media. You can spell it out or use the numbers, 1230.media. Now, let's get back to the conversation. One of the things I like to do on the Everyday Christian podcast is kind of role play and give the what I you wouldn't say this of yourself, but what I would consider the expert in a field an opportunity to kind of help me respond to this. So if I'm the everyday Christian and here's my
Mhm.
scenario, help me walk through this. I'm uh, I'm getting ready. I got a new job, and
Mhm.
so me and my wife and my children are getting ready to move in just a couple of days, and there's still so much to do. We've got to load the truck. We're going. It's a new school. It's a new job. New church. So it's new friends. We're going to be moving away from family. My mom's not going to be there for me anymore, and I don't have the babysitters I used to have, and a life changing move can create a ton of areas of anxiety. So
Oh, for
if
sure.
if that's my if that's my story, I'm getting ready to move my family across country, away from everything we've known, and it's a stressful time, and it's more expensive than we thought, but all of this is going on. As a
Mhm.
believer, how would you counsel somebody like me through a situation like that?
Okay. What I would do is I would sit down with that person and say, let's try to identify some things that are bothering you. And I want to identify what is a genuine concern and then what is really an irrational fear.
Yeah,
Because and it's let me tell you, Matt, it's a fine line between the two.
sure.
And we can sometimes move quickly into an irrational fear when really it was just a genuine concern. And
Yeah,
yes, there is going to be the concern is I'm not going to have a babysitter. Well, that may be a genuine concern, but there may be another solution for that.
yep,
So instead of quickly moving to the irrational fear because my mother-in-law is not there, how are we going to handle this? And next thing it moves into the how, why, where, and a
Right.
multitude of questions come. We want to pull them back, and we want to work through each of the issues. And again, it's addressing these to say, okay, that is a concern. Let's look at some options to work through this. This is getting my thoughts back into check.
So I'm concerned that when we move, it's going to take my kids a long time to make friends. They've
Hmm.
always lived in the same place, and my son's a teenager, so
Yes,
I'm worried that he's not going to be able to connect. Now what?
correct. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to say, okay, so Matt, that's a genuine concern that happens in people's lives. Let's think about some strategies that we can put into place to address some of these concerns. Now, if once I have a strategy, it might be, does your son like to play sport? Does he
Mhm.
does he do this? And this is, and we start to work through and we address
Right.
that. Sometimes friendships about, we've sort of come out of sporting teams.
Right.
Uh, we work through different, so we come up with some scenarios and say, well, what about this strategy? Now, once I have a strategy, once I have that, I feel like, oh, there's a sense of security here.
Yeah.
There's a sense of stability now. I've got a plan.
Yeah.
When I'm planless, even when I have no strategy, that's when fear can and starts. It becomes another the strategyless life, I suppose. It becomes a seedbed for doubts and fears
Yeah.
because all of a sudden I'm sitting there. I've got nothing to hold on to. I have no plans. I have no direction, and now that just lets my mind go. If it is a mind that has more melancholy in your disposition,
Hmm.
and some people who are more melancholy in the disposition can move off into various, uh, irrational thoughts more quickly than someone who may have a more of a sanguine, outgoing personality who sort of, que sera, come what may will be.
Sure.
They just, and so sometimes our personality may be some of the issues that help foster anxiety quicker than others. And so what I do is try to find out who that person is, work through those
Yeah.
issues, and then give them some possible strategies. And they often can come up with the strategies themselves,
Sure.
but fear can sometimes block that. So you just got to say, okay, well, let's think about this thing. What does your son like to do? What are some areas that you get involved with? Have you searched out what's in that area? Are there some different pursuits in hobbies? Are there whatever it may be?
Hmm.
Is there good youth groups you can be part of? What church are you going to be part of? And yeah, they're the sort of things you want to start to. It's all about talking through the
Right.
processes
And I
and
think it's
giving them some
important.
practical, some solutions.
It seems to me it would be important too for a spouse to understand how they might see it and how their spouse might see it, because you mentioned the two. There's more melancholy, more sanguine. My wife and I are opposites on that. I
Mm,
tend to be a little more, it's going to be fine. I mean, sometimes to a fault. Like I can be optimistic
sure.
when it's foolish sometimes to be optimistic. Like it's going to be fine. It's going to work. We're going to survive. And she's more concerned and worried about how things are going to turn out. I tend
Hmm.
to be, if I'm just being honest, I can sometimes tend to be insensitive to her fears because I'm
Sure.
so just happy go lucky. It's going to be fine.
Hmm.
And I think that's something to be cautious of as well.
Oh, look, well and truly, and I think that's just learning to understand who's in your family and the dynamics of the person, and to respect that,
Yeah.
and to understand that every couple and every relationship is going to have strengths and weaknesses, and
And
the
she's
strength
not
that she may.
wrong to, and that's what I think you're helping me with is it's not wrong for her to have some of those fears. It's not wrong to
Hmm.
have some of those struggles. It's working through that the
Mm.
CBT, tell me that it is cognitive behavioral
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
therapy. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think that was good.
I
S-
actually spin it around and I call it TBC.
Okay.
And people say, "What's TBC?" And I call that thinking biblically about care. So I
Yeah.
sort of think, be careful for nothing, be anxious about nothing. And I
Yeah.
look at the thought replacement that God gives in Philippians 4, where he talks about think on these things. Don't
Yeah.
let your mind be occupied with these things, because if we're not careful, we will just gravitate toward the negative. We
Right.
will gravitate to worst case scenario,
Yeah.
especially as I said, if your person has a disposition in that way. So, and the other thing too, if a person has had previous experiences, previous hurts, it's like once bitten, twice shy.
Right.
I will, whoa, well, hang on, this could happen again. I've got
Yep.
to negate that in a person's life. It doesn't necessarily mean it will.
Yeah.
And we talk through that and again get their thought pattern around. Okay, yeah, you're right. It doesn't have to happen again.
Yeah.
There could be a new progress here. Because sometimes it is just, and that's where the irrational fear kicks in and
Sure.
moves from a genuine concern to an irrational fear.
As
Yep.
we as we start to kind of wind down, there's one other thing that I will probably spend the least amount of time on, but I at least want to address it in case someone's struggling with it or someone knows someone's struggling with it. Here in the United States, in the last year or so, there's been a couple of prominent pastors who have committed suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us know someone. I have a friend who a little over a year ago, whose father committed suicide, and
Yes.
we all know people that have experienced probably at some level a situation with suicide. If someone's dealing with suicidal thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
what's the hope for them? What can we how can we encourage them? How can we help somebody that's dealing with what would be probably the hardest of all of these issues?
Sure. Well, it's interesting you say that, Matt, because in your country, the leading cause of death between ages 15 and 34 is suicide more
I
than
didn't know that.
homicide.
Wow, I didn't know that.
There are more suicides in your country than than homicides. In our country, the leading cause of death is between ages 15 and 34. Is that they break it up in age brackets? Is suicide.
Hmm.
Then it increases again when you hit in your latter years. Sometimes suicide comes back up again, and the reason it happens is not that people want to die; they just don't feel like they can live. And so, again, when a person is struggling with a suicidal thought and they express that,
Mm-hmm.
yes, some people say, oh, it's just a cry for help. Well, it is.
Yeah.
And I tell all of our counsellors and any of our pastoral staff, any people that are involved with this, when a person ever speaks of suicide, do never take it lightly.
Yeah.
Don't dismiss it. Oh, that's just a cry for help. They're just toying around. No, no. Always take a matter seriously
Yeah.
because you don't know. And sometimes it's often the person who doesn't speak that goes and acts out.
Yeah.
And so we look for you look for signs of loneliness and isolation and pulling themselves back and withdrawal and sometimes comments that are made. Now in the social media world, often people will post things on their pages, on their walls, etc., that sort of give
Yeah.
a sense of what's happening. In Australia, we have a day which just last week actually. It's called "Are You OK Day,"
Hmm.
and it's a big push everywhere to ask people, "Are you okay?" And then if there is the negative or the positive answer, then there is processes you work through. Can we talk about it? Can we have lunch together? Can we? And
Yeah.
you want to continue to filter that through to show that genuine interest. That I love my neighbour as myself. I will put out some care. I will put
Yeah.
out some compassion. It doesn't cost you anything.
Sure.
And to always talk a person through every issue that we've dealt with suicide. My wife's had suicidal thoughts as well in part of her mental illness in the early years, and it's a troublesome time.
Yeah.
It's she's expressed it this way. It's not that you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You can't even see the tunnel.
Mm.
She said it's just a darkness. It's like it washes away your personality, and there's just a despair constantly. So again, during those moments, it's about talking, 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 hope, 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 finding areas in that person's life where you can give them reasons to live for.
Yeah.
Now, outside of Christianity, there is always going to be things that you can try to find, whether it be family, whether it be job, whether it be future, whether it be areas. Because what they're saying is, right now, there's something so overwhelming that it's not that I want to die.
Yeah.
It's just I don't think I can. I just don't want to live. I don't want to face the things I'm facing. And so we want to find some answers for them through that because it's and 90% of the people who do commit suicide, there is a attribution to some mental health issue. So
Sure.
out of all those statistics, there is some mental health problem taking place. And
Yeah.
that's where I think we've got to be able to offer solutions. If anyone can offer solutions, it ought to be the church that says we are a place of hope and we
Yep.
got some answers to help you with.
That's good. Well, Dr. Bakss, I know you've written a couple of books, another one on the way, hopefully
Mhm.
available by Christmas in 2019. So if somebody's listening to this in the future, maybe it's even available already for them.
Yeah,
Tell us what those books are, and this is video and audio. So for those watching on video, you can even hold that up for us. But
sure.
but what are those, and where can we find those?
Okay, well, the first book we wrote is this book here. It's called Poles Apart, and it's a Christian couple gives bipolar a voice. And this book deals primarily with the issue of mental illness and the biblical perspective of it, and then deals with bipolar on the mania and the depression aspects, and then gives several chapters on hopes for the Christian life, hopes for people who work through, struggle with mental illness, hopes for those who have to deal with people and live with them,
Mm,
and then the practical solutions and many frequently asked questions like the suicide questions, and many of those things are addressed in Poles Apart. Then the other one is What to Do When Panic Attacks, and it's a book that deals primarily with anxiety issues. So that's What to Do When Panic Attacks, biblical advice for overcoming anxiety. And then the final one is dealing with depression, battling and beating the blues, biblical advice to overcoming depression. All of those books are available on Amazon, on
okay.
Kindle. You can get them through the Amazon or through Kindle, or you can get them through my website, which is www.robertbakss.com.
Okay.
Robertbakss.com. That's BAKSS.com. And they're all available through that website. And you can order them there, and they're dispatched from the United States or from whatever part of the world you live in. And they get out to you from there. So they're helpful resources, and
Yeah.
hopefully they can be an encouragement, as they have been to many, many more people throughout the last year or so. They'll be hopefully helpful to many more.
Well, if anyone is listening or watching this and it's something that you're struggling with or something someone you know is struggling with, let me encourage you get a copy of this. There's other resources, but what's nice about this is it's from a biblical and a Christian perspective, so it's bringing the spiritual side of it as
Mm.
well as the physical and the mental. It's not just any one of those pieces. It's kind of putting the whole puzzle together. Dr. Bakss, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast and for taking some time to educate us. It's been a help to me and hopefully a help to everyone listening. And we appreciate your time and your knowledge on this subject.
You're welcome, Matt. It's been my pleasure, and hopefully it's been a help to some people.
We certainly hope that today's conversation was a help to you. We are really excited to be bringing you quality
Hmm.
content at everydaychristiannetwork.com. So if you have any questions or comments or just want to get in touch with us, feel free to do so on Twitter or Facebook Messenger, and we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can.
Yeah. Even if you have a topic or something you'd like to hear us discuss, or if there's someone you know that would be worth our talking to,
Yeah.
let us know, because we'd like
Yeah.
to reach out to them. Obviously, social media and these kind of things they're like a beast that you have to constantly feed.
Right.
So we're going to be looking for people to interview, people to have
Yeah.
conversations with. So if you know somebody that has seen God work in their life, or they're an expert on a topic, let us know. We'd love to hear from you and be able to help you out with that. We're going to plan to release a new podcast episode every week.
Okay.
Which is going to be challenging. So
Right.
pray for us. But we think it's just worth taking the time to do this. So
Yeah.
every other week will be a conversation like we had today.
Yes.
And then on the alternate weeks, Christy and I are going to try to provide some valuable content. Those podcasts will probably be a little bit shorter.
Uh-huh.
I'm not known to be long-winded.
Really?
Well, okay, a little bit long-winded. But I'm going to try to keep them short because I want it to be something that you have time to listen to.
Yes.
So anyway,
That's a big deal. In
yeah.
Today's culture.
Yeah, we're too busy to listen to long stuff.
For real.
Although, do you realize there are some podcasts? I saw this the other day. I saw a podcast the other day that was like 3.5 or 4 hours long, and people listen to them.
No, they do not.
They do. It's
They
ridiculous.
don't. Come on.
Yeah.
They skim. They fast forward.
That's what I would.
They put it on that fast mode.
Who has time for that? If you're running like 100 miles,
I
then you got time to do
guess.
that.
I guess.
But we'll keep these a little bit shorter. But that's what you can expect as far as the Everyday Christian podcast is concerned. But obviously, check out the website. We're not the only ones providing content on there. I'm super excited about
Yeah.
others that are writing for the blog. And then we've got some other really exciting things coming your way real soon. So keep checking back.
All right. Well, this wraps up our time together today. Thanks for tuning in to the Everyday Christian Network, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.